Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain fell in fine drops on the narrow streets of New York, making the pavement glistening and slippery. The neon signs of the shops flickered in the puddles, and the wind carried a mixture of smoke, spilled coffee, and despair. It was an evening like so many others in this city where wealth and poverty coexist, but this evening would change a life. Richard Davenport, a billionaire known for his ruthless business dealings, strode briskly toward his car. His tense face reflected the anguish of a father who had just spent the night in the hospital. His only daughter, Emily, had fallen gravely ill, and despite the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, and the most sincere prayers, her condition was only worsening. As he rounded a dark corner, a beggar emerged from the shadows. His clothes were dirty and torn, his hands covered in scars, but his eyes shone with a strange, almost supernatural intensity. He bowed slightly and said in a calm but steady voice, "Mr. Davenport, I can cure your daughter." Richard stopped, frozen, unable to believe what he had just heard. He sneered in disbelief. You're making fun of me? You, a homeless man, cure my daughter?" "I'm not making fun of you," the man replied. "I promise you, if you trust me." Part of Richard wanted to leave, throw him out into the cold and forget this encounter, but another part, a terribly human and desperate part, compelled him to listen. He saw in the beggar's eyes something he had never seen in any doctor, any nurse, any figure of power, an absolute conviction, an unwavering faith that everything was still possible. Richard took a deep breath. His heart was pounding, torn between skepticism and the wild hope he had been nurturing for weeks. "Very well," he said finally. Show me. Show me how." The beggar smiled, almost imperceptibly, and pointed to a small abandoned building in an adjacent alley. "Follow me. What you will see is nothing like the medicine you know. But if you open your mind, your daughter will live." That night, in the rain and under the flickering neon lights, Richard Davenport was about to cross an invisible border between reality and the impossible. He didn't yet know that this beggar, this simple man without name or status, was about to turn his life upside down, transform his heart, and show him that sometimes, miracles come from the most unexpected places. The alley smelled of damp and dust, a pungent mixture that made Richard cough with every step. The surrounding buildings seemed to have abandoned all traces of life, broken windows, torn posters, overturned garbage cans. Yet, deep within this forgotten place, Richard sensed a strange energy, as if the world had frozen in time for this encounter to take place. The beggar, Jonah, walked with an almost regal assurance, his worn shoes striking the ground with surprising precision. Richard tried to guess his age, but his features seemed unreadable, marked by years of silent struggles. Why me?" asked Richard, his voice trembling. "Because your heart is both desperate and open," Jonah replied. "Many have money, but few still have the capacity to believe. You are ready to listen?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Listen to what? Words of illusion? Empty promises?" But he found himself following Jonah into a small, abandoned room, its door creaking open. The interior was Spartan, a concrete floor, a few blankets spread out, flickering candles, and a small, rickety wooden desk. The air was thick with the scent of earth and incense. Jonah gestured towards the center of the room. "Here, we'll begin. No machines, no pills. Just you, me, and Emily." Richard clenched his fists. He had paid for the best hospitals, the best doctors, the best treatments, and now he found himself in a squalid room, facing a beggar who claimed to be saving his daughter. The absurdity seemed overwhelming. "And if it doesn't work?" Richard asked, his voice weaker than he wanted to admit. "Then you will know that you have attempted the impossible. But if you trust me, something great will happen." For the first time in weeks, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. Not because he believed in Jonah, but because he saw in this man's eyes something that no one had ever had, an absolute faith in life, and in healing. "Okay," he said finally, his throat tight. "Show me." Jonah smiled, almost imperceptibly, and turned towards a camera that Richard had installed to monitor his daughter's room. Show Emily that life is still possible. Show her that she can fight, and that she can win. Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know if it was fear, skepticism, or excitement, but he understood one thing: this encounter would be the beginning of a path that no wealth, no power, no hospital could have offered him. Back at the Davenports' house, Richard watched Jonah arrange a few simple items in Emily's room: candles, a small bowl of water, and a notebook with yellowed pages. No medical equipment, no medication. Just a quiet, almost sacred space amidst the cold luxury of the apartment. Emily, pale and frail, lay on her bed, her eyes half closed. She didn't understand why a beggar was standing there, speaking softly, as if he knew a secret that no one else could share. Jonah knelt by the bed, placing a light hand in the air above Emily. "Emily," he murmured, "I know you're tired. But I'm going to show you something you can do to help yourself." He began by explaining a simple breathing exercise, but each word seemed to weigh on the air like an invisible bomb. Then, he invited her to close her eyes and imagine a warm, bright light penetrating every cell of her body, gently healing what was ailing. Richard, sitting beside the bed, frowned. This can't work, he thought. And yet, he couldn't look away. He saw his daughter breathing more deeply, her shoulders relaxing, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "Believe in yourself, Emily," Jonah continued. "You have more strength than you know. And sometimes, believing is the first step to healing." As the minutes passed, Emily followed the instructions with surprising calm. Her hands trembled slightly at first, but her breathing became more regular. Richard's face contorted with skepticism and astonishment. He had always believed that only science could save his daughter, but now he saw something that defied logic. After an hour, Jonah got up and slowly stepped back. "This is just the beginning," he said. "The road ahead will be long, but every day you will become stronger." Emily opened her eyes and looked at her father. Her lips trembled slightly before she whispered, "Dad. I think I can do it." Richard felt a mixture of joy, fear, and disbelief overwhelm him. He never would have imagined that a simple beggar, in an empty luxury room, could inspire so much hope in his daughter. Jonah turned to Richard, his eyes shining. "You see? It is not medicine that always saves, it is inner strength, and sometimes, a guide who believes in her even before she believes in herself." Richard, silent, understood that night, something had changed forever. And he knew that this was only the beginning of a path where the impossible could become reality. The next morning, Richard rushed into Emily's room, his heart pounding like never before. It had been a long night, filled with worry and doubt. He expected to find his daughter tired, weak, or worse, unchanged. But what he saw left him speechless. Emily sat on her bed, her hair slightly tousled, her face lit by a shy but lively smile. Her breathing, once labored, was surprisingly steady. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze reflected a newfound energy. "Dad. I feel better," she murmured. Richard knelt beside her, incredulous. "Better?" he repeated, his voice choked with emotion. How is that possible?" Emily turned her gaze towards Jonah, sitting in the shadows, silent but attentive. "He showed me how to breathe, how to believe, how to let the light in," she said, clasping her hands together. Richard felt tears welling up. The doctors had failed. The most advanced treatments had been powerless. And yet, there, before him, his daughter was breathing better, walking almost on the fragile edge of an unexpected miracle. "It's not a miracle," Jonah murmured, almost to himself. "It's the strength you had forgotten, the faith you had lost, and that she's now regaining." Richard turned towards him, still shaken. "But, you're just a beggar. How can you?" "Miracles don't require wealth or prestige," Jonah replied calmly. "They only require faith and heart." At that moment, Richard understood that this encounter had changed far more than his daughter's health. It had changed his entire world. His vision of life, strength, and hope had just been turned upside down. Emily stood up slowly, supported by her father. Each step was a victory, each smile a testament to resilience. Richard knew this was only the beginning, but he could already feel a light reborn in the darkness of his despair. "We'll keep going," Jonah said with an enigmatic smile. "There's still a lot to do, but you'll see, she'll get stronger every day." Richard nodded, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief in his eyes. He knew he had just crossed an invisible border, one where the impossible became possible, guided by a man the world had forgotten, but who possessed the power to transform lives. In the days that followed, Emily's room became a strange mixture of science and mysticism. Richard watched Jonah's every move with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He had seen his daughter smile, breathe better, and even get up on her own, but a part of him remained incredulous. "Dad, will it still work?" asked Emily, worried, her eyes wide open. Richard hesitated, trying to mask his own doubts. I hope so, darling," he replied, more to reassure her than anything else. Jonah, sitting on a simple chair with his hands folded, observed the scene without intervening. "Healing is never linear," he said finally. "There will be days when the shadow seems stronger, but it is precisely in those moments that the light must shine." Richard shook his head in frustration. "How can you be so sure? You have no medical training. You're just a man on the street." Jonah smiled, but not mockingly. His gaze was deep, almost penetrating. "Because healing isn't just in machines or pills. It's here," he said, lightly touching his chest. "And it's here," he added, placing his hand on Emily's forehead. This statement left Richard speechless. Each word seemed to carry a strange, almost tangible weight. He felt fear and disbelief clashing with a hope he hadn't felt for years. The next morning, a subtle change occurred. Emily could sit up longer, her eyes shone with a new energy, and her laughter, faint but sincere, echoed through the room. Richard felt his heart swell with emotion. Every small step forward was a victory, but the doubt lingered. What if it was all just a flash in the pan, a temporary illusion? "Dad, look," said Emily, getting up almost without help. Richard watched her walk a few steps, then stop, a smile on her lips. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Jonah stood up slowly and took a step back. "You see, every day she gets stronger. Doubt is natural, but it mustn't blind you. The faith you place in her, and that she places in herself, that's the real miracle." For the first time in a long time, Richard understood that his wealth, his power, his doctors, none of it had the strength that Jonah possessed, the ability to awaken hope and resilience, even in the most desperate heart. And that night, Richard fell asleep with a mixture of wonder and fear, aware that his daughter was making progress, but that the story was far from over. The real test was yet to come. A few days later, Richard invited Jonah to sit in the living room, away from Emily's bedroom. He needed to understand, to know who this man was who was capable of accomplishing what the doctors had failed to do. Jonah sat down on the sofa, his hands resting on his knees, calm as a sage. He looked Richard straight in the eyes and said, "You want to know who I really am? Very well." Richard, his throat tight, slowly nodded his head. "Yes. I need to know. You saved my daughter, but who are you really?" A heavy silence fell. Then Jonah spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Several years ago, I was a respected doctor. I had a thriving practice, a promising career, and everything money can buy. But I discovered that medicine is sometimes corrupt. That wealth and power often dictate who lives and who dies." Richard Frasana. "So, you've given up on everything?" "Yes," Jonah replied. "I lost my name, my status, my comfort, but I rediscovered what many doctors forget, the true power of healing. Faith, attentiveness, hope, and the connection between the patient and the guide. That is what truly saves." Richard remained silent, overcome by a mixture of respect and perplexity. Jonah continued. "Emily doesn't need sophisticated machines or expensive medication. She needs to believe, to awaken her inner strength, and to have someone to guide her. I'm just showing the way. The real miracle comes from within her. Richard felt a lump form in his throat. Everything he thought he knew about life, about medicine, about the power of money, everything seemed to be crumbling. You could have stayed rich, famous, but you chose this, he said, pointing to the shabby place where Jonah had been living these last few days. Jonah smiled gently. Because sometimes, saving a life is worth more than all the gold in the world. And sometimes, miracles come from those whom no one notices. Richard took a deep breath, finally understanding. His daughter was in good hands. But more than that, he realized that this encounter would change his own life, altering his view of wealth, strength, and what truly mattered. Very well, said Richard, nodding his head. Let's continue then. Show Emily how to become stronger. Jonah got up and walked towards Emily's room, her strange and mysterious figure bathed in the dim light of the apartment. Richard followed him, more alert than ever. He knew now that it wasn't just his daughter's health that was at stake, it was their whole world, ready to be transformed by the impossible. A few weeks had passed since Jonah's arrival in the Davenport family's lives. Emily was progressing slowly but surely. Each morning, she woke up with a little more strength. Each day, her breathing became more regular, and each smile seemed to breathe new energy into her father. However, Richard knew that the real test was approaching. He had observed the small daily miracles, but he wanted to see if Emily could surpass herself, if the light that Jonah had lit in her could truly shine in adversity. Emily, Jonah said one morning, it's time to see how far you can go. I want you to do something you don't think is possible. Emily looked at him anxiously. What should I do? She murmured. Jonah gently placed his hand on his shoulder. Walk to the living room, alone. No wheelchair, no support. Just you. Believe in yourself, and let your body follow what your heart already knows. Richard felt his heart clench. Anguish and hope mingled in his chest. Could his daughter truly accomplish this feat after everything she had been through? Emily took a deep breath. Her legs trembled, but she took one step, then another. Richard held his breath, each movement seemed suspended in time. His smile wavered, then steadied. She covered the halfway distance, panting but determined. Jonah watched her with an almost supernatural calm. Just a little longer, believe in yourself, Emily, he said softly. Emily gave a small cry of concentration and took the last few steps to the living room. She stopped, breathless but standing, her eyes shining with newfound energy. Richard, unable to contain his emotions, burst into tears. You did it. Emily, you really did it, he sobbed, hugging her tightly. Emily smiled shyly. I think I can do it, Dad. Jonah stepped back, a slight smile on his lips. You see, Richard? It's not the machine, it's not the medicine, it's the inner strength that is revealed when you believe you can win. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt immense relief. Doubt, fear, anxiety, everything had transformed into gratitude and wonder. His daughter had accomplished what he thought impossible, guided by a man the world had forgotten, but who possessed the most precious secret, faith in life. Thank you, Jonah, he murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. The credit is all Emily's, Jonah replied. I'm just a guide. And that night, for the first time in a long time, Richard and Emily fell asleep with a new feeling, hope. A hope that promised that, sometimes, the impossible could truly become possible. In the weeks that followed, Richard Davenport no longer saw his daughter solely as a sick child, but as a young woman full of strength and resilience. Every smile from Emily reminded him that he had witnessed something rare, a miracle guided by a man whom no one would have believed capable of changing a life. Richard began to reflect on his own existence. His days, once devoted solely to business and the accumulation of wealth, suddenly seemed empty. The experience with Jonah and Emily had awakened in him a realization he had long ignored: money could not buy happiness, nor true humanity. Emily, he said one evening, kissing her on the forehead, you showed me what I no longer wanted to see, that life, real life, cannot be measured in numbers. Jonah, observing from afar, nodded silently. He knew that Richard's transformation was as important as Emily's healing. Richard began to make radical decisions. He launched several programs to help sick children and disadvantaged families. He transformed abandoned neighborhoods into free healthcare centers and shelters for the homeless. His fortune, once used solely to increase his power, became a tool for saving lives. His employees and associates were stunned by this sudden change. The Richard Davenport they knew, ruthless and obsessed with profit, was giving way to a man guided by empathy, compassion, and a desire to make a difference. Emily, meanwhile, blossomed day by day. She saw her father changing, and this change strengthened her. Every step forward for Emily and every gesture from Richard reflected a virtuous circle: healing inspired transformation, and transformation inspired healing. One night, as Richard watched Emily sleeping peacefully, he whispered, "Thank you, Jonah, thank you for everything. You saved my daughter, but you also saved me." Jonah, sitting in the shadows, simply replied, "The credit is not mine. The credit belongs to those who believed, and who dared to rise up against the impossible." Richard understood that his life had just changed forever. He had not only found his daughter, but he had discovered a meaning that no amount of wealth could provide. And all this thanks to a man forgotten by everyone, but who possessed the most powerful secret of all: faith in life and in those we love. One morning, Richard went into Emily's room to take her to breakfast, but Jonah was no longer there. The small, abandoned room he had been using for the past few weeks was empty, as if no one had ever lived there. The folded blankets, the unlit candles, everything seemed untouched, but the man was gone. Richard felt his heart clench. He searched the apartment, looking in every corner, in every shadow, but Jonah had literally vanished. Not a word, not a trace. Emily, intrigued, looked at him with concern. "Dad, where is he?" Richard hesitated, unable to answer. I don't know," he murmured. "Maybe he left, just left." A shiver ran down his spine. He remembered everything Jonah had accomplished: Emily's healing, the change in his own heart, the renewed hope in their lives. How could an ordinary man, seemingly forgotten by everyone, simply vanish like that, as if he had never existed? Emily sat on the bed, her gaze lost in the void. "He helped me, but now he's gone, why?" Richard approached and took her hand. "Sometimes, people like him have to disappear. Perhaps so that their work can continue, so that hope can spread without them remaining to receive recognition." The mystery surrounding Jonah remained unsolved. Neighbors couldn't recall ever seeing him, and even Richard's few friends were baffled. No one knew who he was or where he came from. Yet, his impact was undeniable. Emily breathed easier, laughed again, and Richard had found a new purpose in life. "Dad." Emily thought quietly, "Maybe he was never real," she murmured. Richard held her close to him. "It doesn't matter whether he was real or not, Emily. What matters is what he showed us. And what he left us, it's a miracle we must continue to honor." His disappearance left a mysterious void, but it also amplified the transformation of the Davenports. The man they had never understood or truly known had changed their world forever. And Richard knew, deep down, that Jonah's lesson would continue to guide them, even in his absence. The weeks passed, and Emily gradually regained her full energy. Her laughter echoed through the corridors of the Davenports' luxurious apartment, transforming every space into a place of life and warmth. Richard, for his part, felt that the experience with Jonah had awakened in him a mission greater than himself. Every day, he thought about the mysterious beggar who had turned their lives upside down. His disappearance left a void, but it also fueled a powerful desire to continue what he had started. Richard then decided to act. "Emily," he said one evening as he watched her drawing at the living room table, "we have to do something, to help others, like Jonah helped us." Emily nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, Dad. I don't want anyone to have to feel as helpless as I did, before he arrives." Richard began by funding programs for sick children, creating spaces where they could receive free care, encouragement, and above all, hope. He transformed abandoned buildings into support centers for disadvantaged families. Every step forward, every smile restored, reminded Richard of Jonah's face and the faith he had instilled in Emily. Emily, for her part, actively participated. She accompanied her father on visits, encouraged the sick children, and shared her own journey to recovery. She became a living symbol of resilience and hope. Richard once addressed a group of parents gathered in one of the centers. "We cannot always control what life throws our way, but we can choose to believe, to fight, and to help those in need. That is what one man, a simple man, taught us, and we must continue his work." Every action, every child's smile, every medical advance made at these centers reminded Richard and Emily of the impact Jonah had had on them. The departed beggar had left an invisible but powerful legacy, and their gratitude was now transforming into a force capable of changing lives every day. Richard knew that the true miracle wasn't just Emily's healing, but the transformation of his own heart. Thanks to Jonah, he had understood that money and power were empty without compassion and action. And Emily, his daughter, now carried this lesson with her, ready to inspire the world around her. Years had passed since Jonah's mysterious disappearance. Emily, now an adult, walked the halls of the centers she and her father had founded. Every child's smile, every medical advancement, every burst of laughter was a living reminder of what the man had accomplished, even in his absence. Richard, calmer and more serene, often watched him work with passion. He knew that the man they had never truly known had left an indelible mark on their lives. Jonah wasn't just the one who had saved Emily, he was the one who had awakened their humanity, their faith, and their desire to do good. One day, Emily took a moment to talk to her father. "Dad, do you think he knew he was going to disappear like that?" Richard smiled, his gaze lost in the memory of that mysterious beggar. "Perhaps, or perhaps he just wanted to show us that true power does not reside in wealth or fame, but in what one leaves behind." Emily nodded. She now understood what Jonah had done for them. What he had left behind was not simply a medical miracle, but an invisible legacy, faith in oneself, the strength to transform one's own life and the lives of others, and the idea that sometimes, the greatest miracles come from those whom no one notices. Richard placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We will continue his work, Emily. Every day, every life we help will be a tribute to what he taught us." Emily smiled, her eyes shining. "Yes, Dad. We will never forget it." And as the sun set over the city, casting its last rays on the streets and buildings, Richard and Emily understood a simple yet profound truth: miracles never truly disappear. They live on in the hearts of those who believe, in the actions of those who love, and in the lives they transform, even after the man who guided them has faded into the shadows. The beggar Jonah had disappeared, but his invisible legacy endured. And in every smile, every life saved, every act of kindness, his spirit continued to illuminate the world.